If getting your child to step away from screen feels like a major negotiation, well, this is the episode for you. Hi, I'm Dr. Roseann, and I make calming dysregulation easy. This is one of the most important topics in modern times for all parents, and that's how to manage transitioning off of devices. Doesn't matter whether your kid is 5, 25, 15, this is hard. Device dysregulation, I'm trademarking that. So the brain experiences a lot of things when you're on a device. It gets overstimulated and there are actually dopamine spikes. And when that neurotransmitter comes out, right, and there's a feel good component, your child's brain has a need for constant stimulation. And this occurs in adults too. It's just different in a child's brain because we don't have the maturity. We don't have the background to say, okay, I need to pace myself. I mean, I'm saying most adults, I'm not saying all adults. It becomes increasingly hard not to be on our devices, right? Even when our device is near us in our sleep, it actually interferes with our sleep because our subconscious brain knows it's there. You'll awaken more frequently or have more disrupted sleep just by having proximity, which is kind of freaky. When we have the stimulation on the device, it triggers a surge of dopamine. And you get this immediate effect, right, of being on a device, and there's action, and then there's a dopamine hit. And what happens, particularly in young brains, is they start to crave the dopamine hit. Then, when they're not on their devices, they're more likely to feel bored, very common word we hear from kids, or agitated because they're not getting the dopamine spikes, right? That's all right. We got other ways to do it. And there needs to be boundaries around our devices because if you're not putting boundaries around your devices, particularly with young kids, you're never getting them off. Boundaries are possible. Transitioning, getting them off the device is possible, right? Younger brains are more vulnerable to forming these dopamine driven reward behaviors because it's new. And then you start craving it all the time. I think one of my saddest things that I see is that kids today, like when they go out with their parents at restaurants, young kids, you see an iPhone, you see a phone propped up, and while they're eating. Now, I'm not there at every meal, but I'm just saying this is like happening all the time. You don't see interaction with young children, you see devices babysitting kids. On top of that, now you're understanding what's happening is that this dopamine craving is driving this need to be on there. There's very hard to replicate that immediate rewards these devices provide, particularly when you're, young children are watching Coco Lemon. I have a great blog on that. You're playing games, all of that. The brain gets used to these rapid shifts in attention that becomes very hard to replicate. And then you try to shift them to less engaging activities, and it's a problem. Also, within that, right, besides the overstimulation of the nervous system, you have a tendency to get hyper-focused behaviors that result, right? So they get fixated on it. Part of it is that dopamine, but it's that immediate gratification that is much harder to achieve with, let's say, playing with one of my favorite things, Legos or art. And that's a delayed gratification. Does the same rewards in the brain, but it takes time, right? And we want our kids to have regulated nervous systems, not just now, people, but in the future, right? When the brain starts moving into these under and overstimulated patterns due to constant device usage, right? You're going to see things from, like, on the overstimulated side, you're going to see fight, flight responses, agitated responses, potentially freeze where they're, immobile, they're not doing anything. All from devices, people. Or you might see some of those understimulated behaviors like looking like they have ADD, boredom. You can see a range of behavior. It manifests behaviorally, essentially the withdrawal from the devices. I mean, device dysregulation is real. And kids that only can regulate when they're on their device are going to have a much harder time regulating, right? So the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. So the more you do self-regulation activities, like I said, Legos, art, building activities, I mean, just things that kids should be doing of all ages, right? Even if you have to push your teenager to build the Star Wars set that you got for Christmas. Not saying that's real, but it is. Then what happens is the more you do those activities, the more you're able to self-regulate off the devices. The more you give your kids device time. Now remember, kids in America are spending 7.25 hours and up on their devices, school age and up. It's kind of startling. So let's dive into strategies, because if you're dreading transitions off of your screens at every time you try to do this, then you need proven strategies to help your kids, right? Because yes, it's never going to be perfect getting your kid off of a device, but if it really is a screen time battle every time, you probably have not done what you need to do to have your kids have secure boundaries, clear boundaries, and the strategies in place. So, number one thing you need, I've already said it, is you need clear and consistent boundaries. Now, I know you think you're being clear about your boundaries on your devices, but I'm finding that that's just not the case with most parents. I mean, I talk about this ad nauseum. There is not a set of parents who come to me in my one-to-one program or in our dysregulation solution. There is not anybody who does not bring this up. If you're interested in working with us, by the way, and you need a solution, you go to drroseann.com/help. We got some really cool solutions in there. And there's a whole section about devices and our dysregulation solution. You need to set rules ahead of time on your device. So is it a chart? Is it a timer? Is it some type of technology that is, either controlling, the amount of time they're on a particular platform, or what we did is we controlled the actual Wi-Fi time, because it was a lot easier to just be like, it cuts off, right? And so what you need to do is be clear about those boundaries. And more importantly, how about this? You need to stick to your device boundaries, because your kids will negotiate and negotiate and negotiate. Now, hopefully it's a pleasant negotiation, but a lot of times it turns into this whole big thing, right? And so what we did in our house, which we found really helpful and I think led to better usage later, was that we had this technology that monitored exactly, they had, hey, you have an hour, and it just shuts off and it's outside of our control. At first they were really pissed that it would just turn off. And then they realized later we taught them how to self-monitor, right? So what's your own timer, right? Because I'm not going to do that. So is there a timer? You set that up. And I'm talking the kids were really young. They started to be able to control it. Now, what we did in our house is we had a list of things that they could then go to negotiate more time. So there would be a list of chores. They were all chores, and they would say, hey, I'm going to, empty the dishwasher. I'm going to clean the cat litter. I'm going to take the laundry down, whatever it was. Can I get this much time? So I would say, okay, well, when you're done, that's fine. We would negotiate. And they knew that it had to be a reasonable amount of time. It just became like, I'm going to do this for more. It's sort of like when an employee comes to you and says, can I work overtime? And I'm going to work on these 5 things. You're like, that'd be great. No problem. So very clear and consistency. The moment you are not consistent over this device, this is where this is where it really starts to happen, right? And they start to really get into a pattern, because they know that the final answer is not the final answer, right? So even though I'm giving you an out, there was a healthy alternative to it. And I do really feel like technology is incredibly helpful about clear and consistent boundaries. You using technology to set those boundaries can be really helpful and cuts down on the friction. Okay. So you always want to give an advance warning, right? So if you particularly have a kid that's really struggles with device, you're not using a timer like I suggested, something that's automatic, you're going to have advance warning. So is it a timer like talked about in general transitioning in the previous episode? I like to set a timer physically away from my child so they have to get up and turn it off. I also like visual timers, particularly liked visual timers when my kids were young and they could see timetimer.com. They could actually see the countdown. So it moves to, let's say 60 minutes, and it would be all red. And as the times went down, the red would disappear and they would have less time. So 5 minutes, they'd have a small amount of red. It's very, very clear. You need a visual timer and as independent as possible so you're out of it, right? And we already talked about teaching them to self-monitor, to control their own time, but also to really start to ask questions about how much time do you think you were on there? Oh, I thought I was on there 20 minutes. Well, that was actually 45. Wow. Okay. Debriefing after transitions from devices is great. Today that seemed like that was no big deal. What was different today for you? And getting them to connect, not like it was a rotten day. That was way worse than the other ones. If somebody's activated, they're not going to be able to connect and pay attention. When somebody's regulated, that's when we want to find out, like, oh, hey, what's going on? And you get them to be in their own conscious awareness. Like, oh, I find it easier if I, put the timer on the stove. So I have to walk over there and that's really helpful for me. Or you gave me a warning today and I really need a warning, mom, or whatever it is. And you want to point it out. You want to reinforce when they're acting appropriately. I think the next one is really harder. We want to replace screen time with engaging activities. And, it's not just offering them an art activity or a building activity or something like that. I'm really into sensory activities for all ages. I think they're very calming and stimulating. When you are teaching your kids to do this, just like in the pandemic, you have to actually walk over and transition with them. You can't just say, go to your room, go and do this. When they're getting these dopamine spikes, these immediate feedback from the devices, and then you try to transition into something else, as you remember from the pandemic, right? When we all, whether you wanted to be a homeschooler or not, you saw these meltdowns because kids just didn't know what to do. So we want to make sure that we have sensory activities, different ways to self-regulate. Again, I love arts and crafts. I love building activities. I'm going to talk a lot about it in my book coming out. You'll know more about it. Contract's almost signed. What will happen is you need to help set it up, show them how it's done, get into a routine. You're not going to have to do this forever. And you can either spend time arguing with your kid or setting them up into an engaging activity that teaches their brain and body to self-regulate. And ideally, these are activities that you can continue to do, right? You can always do arts and crafts, and it's gender neutral, and it is truly the best self-regulation activity. But maybe your kid's a nature kid. Maybe it's a nature walk. Maybe it's something else. But you need another stimulating and calming activity to replace it. And it's got to be part of the routine. This isn't a one-off, because if you're doing one-offs, again, you're not forming that positive habit in the brain, and you're reinforcing the brain's dopamine surges from the devices, right? Another tip that I have is turning off devices gently, right? So even though using technology turns it off real quick, there are other ways to do things, particularly for my neurodivergent kids who really rely on the stimulation from devices. Can you have a dimming effect? Can you dim the lights? Can you say, hey, I'm going to let you finish this level, right? Say, what level are you at? Be smart, mom and dad, grandma, grandpa. What level are you at? I'm on level blah, blah, blah. Okay. How much longer do you think you have to finish this level? Okay. I think I'm going to be done in about 7 minutes. Okay. I'm going to let you finish this level and then we're done. We got a deal? Okay. What's the deal? You're going to finish this level. Okay. And then, you really want to reinforce when they do that, right? So that becomes that clear boundary for them. You want to be careful. If this moves on to the next thing and they can't handle that, your kid needs something that just shuts right off. My other kid, I need something to shut right off. You were going to negotiate with me for 10 years and then it was going to turn into a battle. Another tip is to create a docking station for devices. And this should be a family docking station. This is hard for me, but actually, we put all our devices on this part in the kitchen and we just leave our devices there. And I put all my devices there and then I walk away from it. And so do my teenagers. It creates a habit, creates a healthy habit. Like you're done, it's off, it gets moved here. If it's sitting next to you, my gosh. I mean, I have to have my phone on, it's on do not disturb, and it's here because I need timers and things like that. But in your brain, it's there and you want to check it. And it's the same thing for your child. Your child's not any different from you. In fact, they have less than an ability to control that. They haven't developed, their frontal lobes are not fully developed, right? You want to have family screen free time. Yeah. So, whip out your board games. My favorites, love Jenga. It's easy and it's great. It's fun. Can have a good laugh. Always love Connect 4, right from, I don't know, the 80s. Loved it. It's a good game. It's quick strategy. Think about different things you could be doing, and also you could be doing nothing too. You don't have to have a board game. You really could be reading time. But what's your routine? In terms of, something that's really hard is you do have to lead by example. So, don't be looking at your phone and telling your kid to get off their device. You have to role model healthy usage. And I respect, as somebody who's an entrepreneur, who works from home, who has an office, who does all these things, it can be hard to have that line between your work and your device. And your kids will say, well, you're on your device. And you're like, but I'm working. They don't always know that. So I think having that role model, like, hey, I'm off, I'm not doing anything else right now, I'm done with work for the rest of the night, and kind of making that announcement. My kids, see that. I personally struggle as I'm working on this book of the fine line, like how many hours are there in the day? What else, should I be doing? I'm already, do meetings on the treadmill and all those other things. So role modeling healthy usage. And lastly, when is it really move from just normal device dysregulation to I got myself a clinical problem? If you're doing these things and you're really being consistent and it is nothing but friction, you really may have a kid who really struggles with self-regulation. You're going to see a higher level of those fight, flight, or freezes. You're going to see all those nervous system activations. You're going to see anger, irritation. You also might see on the other side total withdrawal and just complete flatness, a lack of communication without it. And, you probably need some help. If you're looking for help, you can always go to our solution matcher. You can go to drroseann.com/help to get the help that you need. And moving through parenting in modern times is just not easy. And you need guidance. And that's exactly what I've done. I've taken these 30 years and drilled it down in a way that's digestible and easy. I'd love to see you use some of these strategies. I hope you start implementing, and please let me know how they're impacting you. You can either leave a review or drop a comment if you're watching this on YouTube.